Welcome, everyone. I'm Bob Staretz, one of the founders of the Grokking Wholeness website. Um, this is the first of several sessions uh, in the explorations into the nature of consciousness. Uh, each session will be posted on the Grokking Wholeness YouTube channel. I encourage you to subscribe to that channel. As when you do, and if you click the notification bell, you will receive indications when we post new videos to the channel. Also, a copy of the presentation used in this series can be found on the Grokking Wholeness website. It will be located under the resources menu item. Scroll down to presentations, and I believe under presentations, it's called A Brief Overview of Consciousness. Um, that is probably a misnomer. We will be going for breadth as opposed to depth, but we will be covering a lot of ground in this class. I hope you find it enjoyable, and if you have any questions, we'll try to accommodate your questions during the session. And if not, if you think of something, perhaps you could save it for the next session. And for those of you who are watching this after the session has already been given, I will be looking periodically at the comments section on YouTube. So if you have any questions, if I think that it's something that hasn't been already addressed, I will try to answer it as soon as I can. So with that, I'd like to begin the presentation. I would request that you save any live questions until after I get through the slides. We'll only go through about a dozen slides during each session. That's more than enough to stimulate a lot of discussion. And I think you will find that if you have some questions, some of them will be answered on a subsequent slide. So give me an opportunity to get through the slides for each session that I have prepared. And then if you still have questions, I'll be happy to entertain them. So enjoy the presentation, and I look forward to interacting with you after the session is over. Thank you. So to begin, I'd like you all to take a look at this picture. And what I'm going to do is take you on a little journey for a second. Obviously, this is an apple that's hanging on an apple tree. It's close to being ripe. So why don't you close your eyes for a second and let me just walk you through a little journey. Okay, you're walking in an apple orchard. It's fall. Many of the apples are ripe. You notice this one apple on a tree. It's a little wet because it rained a little bit earlier. You notice the color of the apple. You notice the fragrance from the apple trees and the apple and the grass and everything around you. You walk up to this one tree that has this low-hanging apple on it. It's a little bit wet from the rain that occurred earlier. You pick the apple in your hand, you twist it, and then the stem breaks off, and you're now holding the apple in your hand. Notice what the apple feels like in your hand. Now bring it up to your nose and smell the apple, and notice the smell of the apple, the fragrance of the apple. Now take a bite out of the apple. Notice what it feels like on your tongue, the texture, the moistness of the apple, the flavor of the apple. And just think about the experience of selecting the apple, getting to know what the apple is. And now imagine that you've picked a bag full of apples and you've walked out of the orchard and you meet an individual on the street who is from, let's say he's from Africa. Never seen an apple tree, never seen an apple, never tasted an apple, never felt an apple. And now your job is to explain to him what an apple is. So think about the words you're going to use. You're not going to give him an apple. You're just going to try to describe what the apple is. So think about how you would explain to somebody who's never experienced an apple before. How would you explain to that individual what an apple is? Just think about it for a few seconds, and then I'm going to ask each of you to tell the rest of us how you would explain the experience of the apple to somebody who'd never experienced one before. Okay, I've stopped sharing. Let's all get back and who would like to go first? How would you describe an apple to somebody who'd never experienced one before? Anybody?
I'll volunteer, Bob. Give it my best shot. Okay, it's round. It's sweet. It's moist in my mouth and crunches when I chew on it. And it releases the juice in my mouth. And this apple is red in color, most of it. In the center where it's was attached to the tree, it's kind of yellowish right there. Anything else? Round, sweet, crunches. Oh, and I don't know, it'd be difficult to explain the smell of it. So I'll let that to somebody else.
Okay, anybody else would like to contribute anything?
I think the smell is fresh and crisp and agree with Linda's description. I would say it's lightly sweet because usually the apples I have aren't too sweet, but yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'll jump in. The first thing that came to my mind is to let him know that it's a fruit. Um, and I would try to understand what kind of fruit exists in his country. And I'll say, well, this is like a fruit like that, like the banana is to you, the apple is to us. And I would also say that it's crispy, that it's hard on the hard side, and that it's completely edible. It's not going to poison you.
Okay. Just as an aside, Rebecca, you froze for a minute. When that happens, that means that there's probably too much traffic on your end of the internet. And sometimes if it happens and you notice it happens, if you shut off your video and you're only using audio, that uses a lot less bandwidth and you keep on going. Luckily, we didn't lose your image. You just froze. So, but we got all your audio, so that's great. Okay, Brian, do you have anything you want to add to what anybody said?
Yes, I would ask them what their favorite food is.
Okay,
And then I would try and go from there to ask where it comes from. Maybe it comes from a tree or a bush. And then I would go to what do you like about it? And then use whatever the response is to try to connect to the sweetness and the color, the moisture in an apple, and see if I can get a match.
Okay. All right. If we took everyone's description and put them all together, do you think that person would understand what it was to experience an apple?
They could get close, but probably not until they had it in their mouth.
Well, I would question whether they would even get close, because the only way you can know an apple is to actually have the experience of the apple. And that's what consciousness is all about. Consciousness, at least the fundamental aspect of it, is all about what does something feel like? What is it to know an apple? What is it to know a color red? What is it to know the beauty of a sunset? What is it to know love? These are all things, words are very poor representations of the actual experience. And unless you actually have the experience, you can never know what an apple is. You may get an idea by relating it to something else you're familiar with, but you will never really truly understand an apple. And that's what the nature of consciousness it's all about. What does an experience feel like? Okay, let's go back to the slides again. So what is the intention? To begin with, to establish a common vocabulary and baseline. A lot of people, there's a lot of words associated with consciousness, and we want to make sure that we have a common understanding of the words that we're using to describe what consciousness is. For the first half of this presentation, it's mostly going to be answering the first bullet, establishing a common vocabulary and understanding of having a baseline of what major aspects of consciousness are. In the second half of the presentation, we're going to review the state of the art in the science of consciousness, and we'll talk about what the science of consciousness is in just a minute. We'll also talk about issues, implications, and a coming paradigm shift, because I think for the first time in the more modern era, there's enough scientific and anecdotal evidence that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way we view reality and the nature of consciousness. And we're going to talk about that. And in that last regard, some of the contents we're going to talk about may challenge some long-held beliefs that you have about what the nature of consciousness is and its larger role in the nature of reality. So, a lot to talk about. So, why consciousness? I think this is important for several reasons. First of all, some great thinkers in the last 400 years or so. Albert Einstein, you cannot solve a problem with the same kind of thinking that got you into the problem in the first place. So, he's also quoted as saying, if you try to solve a problem and you keep banging your head against the wall and it keeps hurting, you're not going to stop the hurt unless you do something different and stop banging your head against the wall. So, Carl Jung, we live in a perception box. We don't see reality the way it is. We see reality the way we are. And reality is filtered by our beliefs, our habits, our cultural traditions, and so on. And finally, Rene Descartes, who initially was trying to make a political statement to separate the church from science so science could go off and study the natural world and leave things of spirit, including consciousness, to the church. It was originally set up as a political statement because in those days, as you may recall, Bernardo, let's see, one of Copernicus's followers, whose name escapes me right at the moment, was burned at the stake because Copernicus had the good sense not to publish his findings that the sun wasn't the center of the known universe at the time. He waited, and then Bernardo Bruno Gordino, I believe it was something like that. Anyways, he was burned at the stake by the church for committing heresy, saying that the sun was at the center of the known universe and not the earth. So Rene Descartes came up with the separation of the natural world and the matters of consciousness and spirit to get the church out of the doings of the natural philosophers, which is what scientists were called at the time. The only certainty there is in the world, I am conscious, therefore I am. And this course is a Latin equivalent to that, which I'm sure many of you have seen. So a change of perspective is urgently needed in the 21st century. And I'd like to talk about why. And that perspective has to do with the way we view the world we live in. Until the mid-19th century, that is, say 1850, everything we generally needed to know to survive and thrive could be learned at our parents' knee by the ripe old age of 6. Learn how to sow seeds into the ground, how to take care of the crops, how to harvest them, how to make your own clothes, how to make furniture, how to make a crude house to live in, and so on, and how to tend to all the things that you needed to sustain your life back in those days. Our knowledge of the world, our instincts, and our beliefs no longer serve us well. Instead, they act to our detriment. And why is that? Because things are changing so rapidly. What we learned at an earlier age may no longer appropriate. As a matter of fact, it may be inappropriate, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Our cultural traditions and our religious traditions are based on ancient understandings and teachings, woefully out of date and based on the way things operated 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Okay. One of the things that I think we all recognize, when I was born, there were 2.5 billion people on the planet. There's now 8 billion people on the planet. It's nearly tripled in my lifetime. And the Earth is a closed system, like it or not. And eventually, in a closed system, you run out of resources. So the sooner we recognize that the current growth economy that we all live in is unsustainable. Okay. Also, we understand from our sciences that science has a long way to go to understand the reality that we live in. It's clearly incomplete, and there are many, many big questions right now that scientists are working on and have no real clue or understanding on where their investigations might lead. Okay, all experience that humanity has, whether individually or collectively, are real. But many of the interpretations of the experiences we have are not. Let me give you a far out example. I know some of you may believe in reincarnation, and some people believe that consciousness survives bodily death and that consciousness reincarnates in another individual somewhere in the future. Well, that's one interpretation, and that's fine. Another interpretation might be that our consciousness doesn't survive, but our memories might survive in something called the Akashic record or the quantum hologram or something like that. And that when we experience what it seems to be a past life, may be that we are somehow tuned in to the memory of somebody that lived before us, and it was not our lives. So the experience that people report, unless they're lying, of course, is subject to interpretation. And is that interpretation the correct one or not? So we now know that human knowledge probably has a half-life of about 18 to 24 months. That means that everything you learned 2 years ago, half of it is probably outdated and no longer appropriate or effective, and has been supplanted by something else. So clearly, if we remain closed-minded and not interested in learning new things or adapting new ways to situations, not only may it be harmful, it may be totally destructive to our lives. And given the rapid pace of change right now and the powerful technology that humanity has developed, it only takes one individual in a position of power to literally wipe out most of the life on the planet, just by somebody who is demented or decides to press that button, or possibly take out the energy grid of most of the world, or just say the United States. Just imagine what might happen if we lost the energy grid for a period of a week. All the portable generators that fuel our hospitals or to keep them going would run out of fuel within 24 to 48 hours. Refrigeration would fail. Grocery stores wouldn't be able to keep any refrigeration going. Within a week, we'd revert back to a pre-industrial era. So it's incumbent upon us to understand the nature of consciousness, because consciousness is how we review the reality that we're a part of. So one of my favorite people from the past is Buckminster Fuller, and he's done many things. He's one of the things he said: to understand the human condition, you must first understand the universe. And mystics and sages have been saying from all cultures and all eras that if you want to understand the universe, you better understand yourself first. So which is it? Is it the chicken or the egg? It turns out that they're both right, and we have to do both at the same time. So we define ourselves and our cultural traditions and everything that we do and experience through our consciousness. It's the only way we know how we and everything else exists. So what is consciousness? Well, this chart is about consciousness studies, which is an interdisciplinary field that explores the nature of consciousness, its experiences, and its behaviors. And please know, I am not using the brain and consciousness as synonymous, because that makes a big assumption that consciousness is a byproduct of the processing of a brain. And I'm deliberately making the distinction. They're not the same thing at all. Okay, so consciousness studies combines insights from the philosophy, neurosciences, psychology, spirituality, even quantum physics and other related fields. And it seeks to understand all aspects of consciousness, including what we consider external objective experiences, and including through our perceptual senses, as well as the internal subjective experiences, which is the first person view, our endogenous experiences of thinking, our emotions or feelings, etc. And it also involves the interactions between subjective, our inner experience, and our objective outer third person experiences. And finally, the correlations between brain activity within and between all these experiences. So without consciousness, this is one of my favorite slides. if you really think about it, there would be no knowing and no existence. Consciousness is what goes away when we are under anesthetics or enter dreamless sleep. Not quite. Because if we were totally unconscious during sleep, a loud noise or somebody touching us would not wake us up. So there is still some consciousness that remains, although not to the extent that is when we're in the waking state. But look what we'd lose without consciousness. There's no me, there's no friends, there's no environment, there's no objects, no colors, no memories, no past, no emotions, no sensations, no taste, no thoughts, no sounds, no sights, no present. There is nothing. There is no existence. So without consciousness, there is no existence at all. So another way to say consciousness, and there's two major aspects of consciousness. One is called phenomenal consciousness, and one is called metaconsciousness or self-reflection. What I'm talking about here is phenomenal consciousness, which is the base level of consciousness that exists in all living creatures. And it is, what is it like to have an experience? It is a state of being. It's not a state of doing. And that's very important. And we'll explain that in a lot more detail later on. So to understand the nature of consciousness, there's two aspects of it that we have to look at. By the way, if it looks like I'm not looking into the camera, I have 3 monitors on my desktop. The one that is displaying the presentation is on my left. So that's why I'm looking to my left. Anyway, we're going to look at consciousness from a scientific point of view. And by the way, science is the study of the behavior of nature. It's what nature does. It's based on experimentation and experimental evidence. Scientists develop hypotheses and then they run experiments. And if the experiment differs from their hypothesis, then they go back to the drawing board and come up with a different hypothesis. But when they're successful, eventually they develop predictive models of how nature will behave. And from those predictive models, then they can build technology. And that's how we get a technological society. Okay, but it's about the behavior of nature. It is not about what nature is. Metaphysics, as used here, is not in the mystical sense. The actual definition of metaphysics is the study of what something is. It's not a mystical explanation. And metaphysics is based on philosophy and logic and reasoning. And metaphysics better support the findings of science. If it doesn't, you might as well throw it away and find a different metaphysical philosophy. And we will look at both in this class to understand the nature of consciousness, because we're going to look at not only what it does, but what it is and what are the leading theories, and does it support the evidence of what our human experience is all about. So I have 2 more slides, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So what is consciousness? And I have a diagram on the right, the causal power of consciousness. Consciousness is the only thing that exists for itself and also exists for external objects. It's self-exciting. If I think of a pink elephant, the pink elephant exists for me. It does not exist for itself. A pink elephant has no significance. The causal power of my consciousness dreamed up the notion of pink elephant. Now, the inputs to consciousness are either come from our perceptual mechanisms, sight, sound, smell, touch, etc., or they can be endogenous. That means internally generated, thinking, feeling, insight, intuition, all those kinds of things. So consciousness is a collection of cognitive complexes, and only one of which has the spotlight of our attention at a time. And of course, on the output side, we can either affect something external to ourselves, or internally we can lead to a different line of thinking based on something that we're experiencing mentally. So the two aspects of consciousness, a state of being, that's phenomenal consciousness, what something feels like. What does an apple feel like? What does it taste like? What is the beauty of a sunset? The seeing the Rocky Mountains for the first time, the feeling of love, etc. Self-reflection, thinking about thinking, or metaconsciousness, the ability to evaluate, plan, and make decisions. That's usually or almost always only found in organisms with a brain. So, but consciousness, as we'll see on the next slide, is much broader in terms of the organisms that it affects than you might be previously have been led to believe. So the phenomenal consciousness is experience. It's all about experience. It's a state of being. What does something feel like? And don't confuse consciousness with intelligence. Intelligence is a state of doing. It's a computation. And that's very important because when we talk about AI later on, contrary to what a lot of people would like to tell you, is that consciousness, our AI is conscious. I would submit to you that is extremely unlikely and probably impossible because it has no causal power. For example, if I run a simulation of a storm, let's say a hurricane outside my house. We live in Florida, so hurricane's a good thing to simulate. Okay, just because I can simulate that storm on a computer doesn't mean the computer is going to get wet. It has no causal power. So it is a simulation. It is not the same as the thing that's being simulated. Okay, so there are two major theories about consciousness that we'll get into, but we won't do that until the second half of the class. There's a lot of stuff that we have to go over first to get everybody to a common place. Consciousness is an epiphenomena of brain processing. That's the traditional materialist perspective, that when the brain gets complex enough, it reaches a certain threshold, and then suddenly consciousness lights up. And the modern term for materialism, by the way, is physicalism, because it takes into the latest findings of quantum physics. But basically, physicalism and materialism basically mean the same thing, that consciousness is an epiphenomena. The other major theory is that consciousness is at the ground state of being, and that consciousness is fundamental, and that consciousness is what creates physicality. An example of that might be, think of a dreaming state. We'll talk more about this later. But when you dream, you're a dream avatar in the dream. There are other things in the dream. There are objects in the dream, people in the dream, houses, trees, friends, people you don't know, animals, whatever. And there are things happening in the dream. When you wake up, you realize you weren't just the dream avatar. Everything happened in the consciousness of the dreamer. And cosmic consciousness, or mind at large, is what one view of consciousness creating physicality, which, and there's a couple of different metaphysical philosophies that we're going to look at. One is called panpsychism, and the other is called idealism. And we'll look at both and see which one seems to make more sense to understand this thing we call consciousness. Okay, last slide, and then we'll have a discussion. Okay. On the horizontal axis here, we have the complexity of life. I have a paramecium, single cell organism in the lower left, and the vertical axis is degrees of consciousness, not kind. It is well known that paramecia will dig little huts in the mud in a pond. They will search for food. They will avoid danger and do a number of other things that seem to exhibit some very basic kinds of conscious behavior. Obviously, there's no nervous system, let alone a brain. And then you have the jellyfish over there, which doesn't have a brain, has about 10,000 neurons, exhibits more behaviors that might be indicative of some primitive kind of consciousness. And then you move up to a bee, which has a nervous system and a brain with about 1 million neurons in it. And then up to a mouse, 35 million, to a dog, which is about 300 to 400 million neurons in the brain, and to a human, which has almost 1 billion neurons. And each of those neurons has up to 50,000 connections to other neurons in the brain. So as complexity seems to increase, the degree of consciousness and what we experience through our consciousness and this metaconsciousness seems to increase with the complexity of life. But the base level, what we call phenomenal consciousness, what something feels like, seems to be shared by everything that's on this chart and everything that's implied by what's between the things that are on this chart. So life and consciousness seem to go hand in hand. And I would say one other thing about life: all life metabolizes, and life is self-organizing. It's not assembled from parts. It grows, and it has the same blueprint in every cell of the body. So life and consciousness seem to be synonymous. And with that, I'm going to stop. That's a lot to take in. It's an overview, but let's talk about what questions that brings up. I see. Okay. My screen froze for a second. I thought I was going to be able to stop the screen share. So that was a lot to take in. So thoughts, anybody?
I have a question that I'd like to pose. Is that okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're still freezing up a little bit.
Yeah, but you can hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. I just moved and I don't have a good connection where I moved, so hopefully that problem will be solved soon. I think that that's what it is. You're saying life is consciousness, and they emerged maybe simultaneously. Are you implying that non-life is not conscious? And what about the plant kingdom or the plant world?
Well, plants are alive, so plants exhibit some fundamental consciousness. There's been all kinds of studies that if you hold heat to a leaf, you know, it will feel that, and it will also affect other leaves on the plants. Also, leaves are phototrophic. They will move to where the sunlight is stronger. So I didn't say that life was synonymous with consciousness. I said that you can't have one without the other, that all life is conscious to varying degrees. The simpler the life form, the simpler the nature of consciousness. Now, we haven't talked about this, but I'll give you a hint of what's coming later on. I personally am an idealist in understanding the nature of consciousness, which means that consciousness is fundamental and that is pervasive in the universe, and in the sense of what I mean by cosmic consciousness. And we are all tiny, infinitesimal, disassociated conscious entities from that conscious, cosmic consciousness while we're alive. And just like when a human being dreams, and you think you're the dream avatar in the dream, and you're also dreaming of houses, cars, all kinds of objects in the dream. An idealist would say that all the physical objects that we experience in our waking state are nothing more than manifestations of the excitations of cosmic consciousness, that everything is a projection of consciousness, just like a human being dreaming, but at a cosmic or universal level. That has all kinds of implications in terms of things that science still denies today, like all kinds of mystical experiences, near-death experiences, psi phenomena, savant syndrome, and terminal lucidity, or all kinds of things that science has no explanation for, have pretty much ready-made explanations if you consider that consciousness, or there's a cosmic consciousness of which we are all a part of, and which we will return to after our physical body dies. And we'll get into that in probably to go through the presentation. It'll take 6 weeks. In the last 4 weeks, I'd like to talk to you more about these alternative metaphysics in great detail and show you some videos that I think you will enjoy on what the implications are if we turn the existing materialism paradigm aside and look at the implications of some of these other metaphysics and what that implies for the nature of consciousness. So I hope the best way to answer your question is use the analogy of a human dreaming, and think of the dream avatar and everything else it experienced in the dream. And then when the human wakes up, it realizes that it was doing everything. All the objects in the dream, all the people, the animals, everything else was all made up by the consciousness of the dreamer. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Okay. Well, I started talking to you about other metaphysics. I think that the evidence is now becoming overwhelming that we have some serious issues with materialism, and that it is no longer can answer many of the questions. I forgot to tell you, but if you're interested in reading something on your own, we have a section under the resources menu item on the website, a section called books. If you click on that, books like this will pop up. Now, this one is relatively easy to read, and it will describe in great detail the rationale for why consciousness is fundamental. The epiphany that Edgar Mitchell had coming back from the moon, where he realized that everything was connected, that it was all oneness, and it was all driven by one consciousness, that was the conclusion that he came to. This book, written by Christoph Koch, he was a chief scientist at the Allen Brain Mind Institute in Seattle, Washington. Brilliant guy. He is not native born, so he speaks with a little bit of a German accent, but this is a wonderful book. He was a hardcore materialist. Basically, he was on the beach in Brazil, had an ayahuasca experience, totally flipped his paradigm upside down. He went from being a hardcore materialist to an idealist. Then I Am Myself the World. Both of these books are in the book section of the website. Now, those are, I have another one here, Existence and Consciousness. I'm not going to go through all these, but what I do want to show you that there's a lot of people beyond physicalism. This book was edited by Kelly. If you're familiar with the Esalen Institute in California, basically he was the founder of Esalen, and they wrote 3 books all about the same size. These have multiple contributions by psychologists, physicists, biologists, neurophysiologists, you name it. And here's the 3rd one. I think this is the latest one, if I'm not mistaken. Irreducible Mind. So I only show you these not because I'm recommending you read it unless you're really a serious reader. These are pretty dense books, but they will give you a much better appreciation for how much work is now being done and why so many people are really questioning the prevailing paradigm that consciousness is an epiphenomena of brain processing. And also, because AI is such a hot topic today, we have people that are running around trying to raise money to the ethics of AI. Can you unplug a computer? Is that killing the AI? Well, I would submit to you that AI is not consciousness, is not conscious. It's intelligent. It does computation and processing and a lot of pattern recognition, but it is not now or nor ever will be conscious because it doesn't metabolize and is not alive. That's not to say that someday in the distant future, we might develop artificial life that becomes conscious, and then maybe we will have to worry about the ethics of unplugging that consciousness. But because one of the things that's also synonymous with consciousness is not only what it feels like, is does it suffer? Is there suffering that's on the negative side of it? And I mean, obviously, most people today would euthanize an animal like a dog, if it has cancer or whatever that's incurable. They would not just let it sit in the corner in agony for weeks while it slowly deteriorates and dies. So obviously the animal is suffering, therefore the animal has consciousness. Now, the implications of all this are, there's so many that's hard to begin with, but you probably are aware that consciousness is about a state of being. It's not a state of behavior. And you're well aware that people who are in an automobile accident and wind up in an emergency room, they're behaviorally unresponsive. And after about 4 or 5 days, a doctor is going to have a conversation with the family and say something like, there's no responsiveness to the external world. If they're on a respirator, we need to pull the plug on the respirator. Well, it turns out that there's been some studies done lately that 20% of the people in that unresponsive state are actually still experiencing consciousness. And in a few cases where they did have slight motor control, they were able to see tears generating from their eyes when they were talking with the family right next to the patient that they were talking about pulling the plug on the respirator. So how can you, if it's non-behavioral, if it's a state of being, how can you determine, even if something appears to be unresponsive, how can you determine that it is still conscious? You brought up, or I brought up the subject of suffering, and we're going to get into stuff like that later on also, because the technology is advancing to the point that in many cases they can detect, even though somebody is unresponsive to the external world, that in fact there's still conscious activity going on within the individual. So we'll talk about that. So I've sort of given you some hints for what's coming, but we still have a lot of basic understanding and level setting to go through before we can get to the point to really discuss those things in more detail. So anybody, well, let's unmute your microphones. Let's see if we can get a little bit of a discussion going. So
I have a thought and just kind of wanting to get some feedback if it's okay.
sure.
Would you agree that consciousness is more of the one universal mind, the God, the spirit? Like we are all fractals of one whole thing?
Well, first of all, don't take my word for anything. You know, the more I know, the more I realize how little I know. But, you know, I've studied this a lot, and there's a consensus that's building out there. And I would, you know, I'm an idealist, and an idealist believes that cosmic consciousness is fundamental. Now, in the sense that it's phenomenal consciousness and it pervades everything. And that phenomenal consciousness that exists in us, although disassociated from the cosmic consciousness, is generated by the cosmic consciousness. And you can call that God if you would like. And you have to distinguish between individual dissociated consciousness, which is what life seems to be, disassociated from the cosmic consciousness. Now, I'm not talking about metaconsciousness or self-reflection. That comes with organisms with a brain. But yes, absolutely. And it's really funny. They've done large-scale simulations of the nature of the universe. And what do you think the universe looks like? Anybody have any ideas? At the largest scale, the scale of the universe, it looks like a neural network. Don't take my word for it. I'll be able to show you that. That physicality is an excitation of consciousness, and an external appearance, physical objects are what consciousness looks like from a third person perspective, from an external perspective. But everything occurs in consciousness. Anything that's not living is generated by mind at large. Just like when a human is dreaming, all the entities that exist in the dream are generated by the dreaming mind. That's what's called mind at large. It's cosmic consciousness minus all disassociated living entities.
I think you have really clicked something for me into place where, there's consciousness and then there's our conscious awareness that comes through thinking, like our awake state where we are conscious of what's happening and I'm talking to you and we're here on the Zoom call, or I might be thinking that I have to do laundry. And that's sort of my conscious thoughts. But then there's this consciousness, this super consciousness, if I can refer it to that, right, from my little human perspective, which is the state of being of everything and that is happening through space and time. And we can call that the creative intelligence of the universe, some sort of, defining factor. And do you think maybe that is all in our subconscious?
Well, we're going to get to the definitions of all these terms, but everything exists in the cosmic mind, in cosmic consciousness, and is created by cosmic consciousness. It's excitations of cosmic consciousness. There is nothing else. It's all only consciousness. Okay, there's not two things. One of the results of Rene Descartes and the separation for political reasons, so to keep the church out of the scientists' business was to establish. No, I lost my train of thought. Let me see if I can get it back. Okay, I'm having a brain freeze. I'm sorry for that. But anyways, we will get into all this in way more detail. Rather than super consciousness, subconsciousness, unconsciousness, and all that, at the lowest level, which pervades everything, and there is only one thing everywhere and every when, that is phenomenal consciousness, cosmic consciousness. That is the foundation of the entire universe and everything in it. And above that is a disassociated consciousness, which is what life is. Now, the boundary between those disassociated consciousness and the cosmic consciousness is porous. And sometimes things leak through. I'll give you an example. When there's a strong emotional bond between two people, let's say a mother and a child, the parents go out for dinner, leave Johnny with a babysitter. Johnny is being fed dinner in his high chair. The parents are enjoying a good meal in a restaurant. Then all of a sudden, the mom says, "Oh my God, something's happened to Johnny." Calls the babysitter, and the babysitter said, "Yeah, Johnny fell out of the high chair." There's all kinds of anecdotal stories like that. They happen all the time. So, especially when there's strong emotional bonds, things like that seem to leak across this cosmic boundary. It's called a Markov blanket in technical terms, but we may get into that or maybe not, but it doesn't matter. The boundary between consciousness of living entities is a little bit like porous, like nothing in nature is absolute and 100% complete. Like combustion, when a fire is burning, all the fuel doesn't burn. There's always leftovers, ashes that don't burn, right? When it rains, as soon as it stops raining, the earth doesn't dry up immediately. It takes time for it to evaporate. So I would suggest that consciousness operates that way, and there's a porous boundary between conscious entities, and things can leak across, especially where there's emotional bonds. And there are reasons for that, which we'll talk about when we get into it later on. Anybody else? Am I going in a direction that you want to go in, or do we need to be going in a different direction?
Good.
Good. Okay, well,
I'm finding it fascinating, Bob.
oh, great. Well,
Fascinating. Yeah.
okay, good. I'm glad you're enjoying it because that was my whole intention on this. Check out our YouTube channel. We do have, I think we have a few videos on consciousness on there. And I just put up a video recently on what the mission and vision of the website is, Grokking Wholeness. And the only reason is that basically we explain in there why understanding the true nature of consciousness is so important. We all know civilization is very vulnerable right now. We're vulnerable because of our technologies. We're vulnerable because, we have crazy people in positions of power around the world who can push the wrong button, and that, basically all life on the planet is in a very difficult situation as a result of one individual. So we better understand the nature of consciousness and develop to higher states of consciousness to have a world that we all know is possible to have. But we have a long way to go, and I hope we get there before something bad might happen. So you never know. So that's what our mission is all about, to help promote the understanding, and we call it conscious evolution to higher states. So anyways, Yeah, so unless anybody has anything else you'd like to talk about for a few minutes, I don't want to overload you. I hope I didn't go into too much detail to confuse you, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about with consciousness. It has all kinds of implications, and there's a whole lot to understand about it. And I hope maybe I don't claim to have all the answers, not even close to it, but I hope that we've just helped you just a little bit get a better appreciation for the various aspects of consciousness and what it might imply.
Can I also share something with
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I actually wanted to share something with you, Rebecca. There's a beautiful book. It's called, if it's either The Hidden Life of Trees or The Secret Life of Trees. And it goes into how trees interact with each other and how mother trees will feed their baby trees. And if there's danger, they'll actually like pull back and warn other trees. So it's really, really fascinating how life extends to, beyond mammals and humans and I guess animals in general. I don't know. I thought I would share that with you. I really enjoyed it. So.
You. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a quick question, Bob. You describe yourself as an idealist, as opposed to a panpsychist. What is panpsychism is exactly?
Okay, well, the difference is that a panpsychic believes that everything is conscious, from the smallest atom to everything else. And they run into a problem called the combination problem. If everything is conscious, including atoms and electrons and protons and all the rest of it, how do they come together and have a unity of consciousness, which is what we experience, right? Um, an idealist would say that there is only one consciousness, and it disassociates from that cosmic mind, that cosmic consciousness. And we know in nature and identity disorder, what is it? DID, dissociated identity disorder, that in fact exists in human beings, that the mind can disassociate into multiple minds or appear. And not only that, you know, um, one mind can dream of the other minds while it's dreaming. So there's interactions between the disassociated states. And that exists in nature, which is a strong indicator that maybe that might be more likely the case than the combination problem that exists with panpsychism. We'll talk more about that a lot later on. When you mentioned the trees before, there's one thing that I would just like to bring to your attention. Um, I don't know if the Earth is the only planet that has life on it. I highly doubt it, given that the laws of nature, chemistry, and physics appear to be the same everywhere. I would assume that life has evolved on other planets. And come to think about it, it now appears that there's remains of organic life on Mars that there's pretty strong evidence has existed. And in fact, that life is what may have seeded Earth through an asteroid impact that threw up chunks of the Martian surface and eventually landed on Earth and was what started life on Earth. But whether that's the case or not, it's highly likely that in the billions and billions of stars which have planets orbiting around them, and you have billions and billions of galaxies, each one with 100 billion stars in it, the chance of life only existing on Earth is infinitesimally small, in my opinion. And then the question arises, well, are those beings on those other planets conscious? And I would say yes, of course, because there is only cosmic consciousness and everything that derives from that. And not only that, what is it like to have experience would be the same on any planet as it is here. So although their form may be totally different, they may be green monsters with 4 arms and 6 legs and a head that's in their belly instead of on top of their shoulders, they probably are conscious beings. And because of that, they would have experience just like we do. So something to think about in the larger environment that we're part of.
Can I ask a question? I don't think I understood it right. The panpsychism, are you trying to mean like an atom is a one consciousness and you are one consciousness and I am one consciousness? Is that what that means?
Okay, well, first of all, consciousness exists in degrees, and there's a way to measure it in integrated information theory called phi, but at the smallest level in panpsychism, everything is conscious. Anything that is a physical object that exists. So like an atom or its constituent parts like an electron, a proton, or a neutron, they all have some tiny aspect of consciousness within them. So then the question comes at, well, when you start combining atoms, does that combined molecule from multiple atoms, is it exist as a unity of consciousness, or is it two separate consciousness somehow tied together? And then you run into the problem, well, what happens if I'm standing on a mountain and I throw a rock down a mountain and the rock breaks up into two pieces? Does it become two disassociated consciousness at that point? Or what happened to the unity of consciousness? So panpsychism has a lot of issues like that. There's no explanation. With idealism, and in particular analytic idealism, which is the branch of idealism which I support, you have the disassociation problem. How can consciousness disassociate? Well, we have examples of that in nature all the time. Human beings through DID disassociate, as a result of trauma or, other things that can happen in life. So it seems to be possible. And if
But
nature,
they both agree that consciousness is one unified thing?
no,
No.
yeah, the combination problem, how all these individual particles combine to form a larger consciousness is the problem with panpsychism. But what they have in common is that both panpsychism and idealism believe that consciousness is fundamental in the universe, not material objects. Somehow with materialism, oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen and all these different elements came together, and when formed molecules, and when those molecules came together and formed enough complexity, suddenly the switch was thrown and it became conscious. That's basically epiphenomena. That means consciousness is a result, a byproduct of the electrical and electrochemical signaling between all these molecules. That's what causes consciousness. And I think there's a lot of people that are hanging on to it. I mean, after all, if you were a neuroscientist and you've been studying materialism for 25 years and written all kinds of papers on why materialism was true, and all of a sudden the evidence starts coming around that says no, it's not an epiphenomena. Consciousness is fundamental in the universe. You might want to resist the change in paradigm. And I think that's where we're at right now. There's a lot of anecdotal and empirical evidence that suggests that we've had it backwards for a long time. And the implications are huge. The best one is that when we die, our existence doesn't end. All our memories, all the emotions that we experience, everything that we learned merges back with cosmic consciousness. Nothing is lost. Okay, well, it looks like we're slowly losing people, and it's 8:30, so I think we'll call it quits. I'll see you all in 2 weeks, and a week ahead of time, you'll get the new Zoom information. Thanks. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
have a good
you.
week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.